It's really those exposures very close to the body that are the most concerning, especially because the link between cell phone radiation and your risks of increasing risk of brain tumor is pretty well established at this point. Of course, they're in heavy users, and we could argue is it in some studies it's 30 minutes per day. So I don't think that's a heavy user. To me, a heavy user in my mind would be 4 or 5 hours per day, a realtor or business people always on their phone next to the head.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Integrative Health Podcast with Dr. Jen. Today, we're going to be talking all about EMFs. So stay tuned if you want to learn all about them, or you need to have some more convincing evidence to share with your friends when they look at you like you're a little crazy. So we have Nick. He's called the EMF guy. Nick Pineault, and I love his last name. It's spelled awesome. So he's the #1 best-selling author of the Non-Tinfoil Guide to EMFs and an advocate for safe technologies. Through his unconventional approach, blending humor, science, and common sense, he's the leading voice on the topic of electromagnetic pollution and how it affects our health. For the last few years, Nick has been interviewing some of the best minds on health and technology and facilitating the creation of the course and educational materials to raise awareness on this very important issue. You can find more about Nick at the emfguy.com. Welcome, Nick. So excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Jen. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. And I asked where he was from before we started because his last name is spelled very French-like and
Oh,
he's
yeah.
in Canada. So yeah. So how would you think that EMF technology and awareness, the US versus Canada, which one's better if we could duel it out?
Hmm. I would say it is probably growing faster in the US because you have the health movement I feel is stronger in the US. The US is kind of leading the way in certain states, whether it's now, I guess, Texas is kind of the new California, the way I see it. And, I'm going to be in Austin next month for the health optimization summit, or in fact, I guess as we're recording this, if it's released beginning of April, it's like mid-April. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the ambience is there like. But I feel like there are more voices in the US compared to Canada. And of course, it's a much larger country, probably, 10 to 13 times more populated. But also, I don't know, there's still, even though, a lot of people are screaming about free speech and all sorts of things in the last years, the fact remains that there are a lot of thought leaders that talk about EMFs and that have emerged and that, have I've had a presence on big media outlets. And I also see that this conversation is growing now, especially because of alternative media. Like, well, what we're doing right now is alternative media, right? It's part of it. Now, this new education online where people are seeking answers by themselves. And yes, they are told by, the Federal Communication Commission, FCC, or FDA, and they're told by the cancer societies that EMF is completely fine, but they start hearing conflicting opinions and then they can make up their own minds. But I find that in the U.S. is flourishing at a rapid pace, and I'm kind of this part of the movement, MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, and as a Canadian, I can stay completely nonpartisan because I'm not even a U.S. citizen. I didn't vote for left or right. I'm kind of just a guy exchanging ideas, and I find that these ideas anyway, when it comes to health and when it comes to what is impacting your health, it should have nothing to do with politics, really. It's just a
Right.
question of, you know, what are we being told about certain things in the environment? And is that true? And are we taking precautions? Because I feel like it's, again, prevention, prevention used to be so key in public health. And I feel like it's almost, something that has been shelved so many decades ago. And we need to go back to the good old thinking of Well, if we're not sure about EMF dangers, if we're not sure if cell phones are safe, instead of doing nothing, let's start reducing exposure. That's the precautionary principle that it's called. And it's really the opposite of what most people are doing these days when it comes to these technologies.
I agree with that. Definitely used to be about prevention, but there's not a lot of money in prevention. And
Uh-huh.
science is good, technology is good, but I kind of agree with my 9-year-old where he always says, I wish technology would just stay, like it would just stop and stay where it's at, right? And I agree with him. I mean, I think that there can always be a sweet spot, right? Where you can do too much or maybe do too little. And I like to teach my kids a sweet spot, right? Because if we weren't at that sweet spot, I wouldn't even be doing this podcast with you, right?
Exactly.
We have Starlink because we can't get internet service where we're at because we're so like out in the country, which I was happy with. And I did an antenna search before we moved here to make sure I wasn't moving, from Ohio to Tennessee right next to a 5G tower.
Yeah.
And these are just the things that we have to think about. But let's kick it off because some people listening out there might not even know the definitions of EMFs and why we should be talking about it because our exposure has increased a lot in the last 100 years.
For sure, it's really these human-made EMFs that are important to talk about. There are natural EMFs, and we are closely. I'd say we need them 100%, like the sunshine or like grounding or earthing when you connect to the earth. These are natural frequencies that we have co-evolved with. But the reality is that a lot of modern exposures of EMFs, electromagnetic fields, or electromagnetic radiation, these are things that even our close ancestors or even our grandparents were never exposed to. So the scientists nowadays have calculated that the average level of EMF pollution in a city has now increased by a quintillion fold in the last 100 years. A quintillion is 1 billion times a billion. So, that's a lot to say the least. We know that our exposure to certain other things within that time frame are maybe equally dangerous, but they're also artificial. For example, artificial processed foods or artificial chemicals that we are now exposed to in the environment, whether it's on food, in the air, and water. So, all of these exposures are artificial in their nature, and your body has to deal with them as a new stressor in the environment. So, yes, life was difficult to some extent 100 years ago, and certain people didn't had malnutrition, for example, and we didn't have many medical advances that we now have. However, they were not exposed to all these new modern stressors. So when we look at the chronic disease epidemic, a lot of people look at pesticides, and rightfully so, at heavy metals, and rightfully so, at mold and other stressors, and social media, and all, but they forget that the radiation emitted by their devices like smartphones, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cell towers, and just our overall use of electricity, all of these things are also modern stressors that we have to take into account if we want to stay healthy in this modern era.
Yeah, it's really crazy. Like you were bringing up the other environmental toxins, and not everyone talks about EMF, and it's prevalent. And I remember a patient that I had, her daughter's school, got some stipend, got some money, and they put up a 5G tower right next to the school. And her
Hmm.
daughter started having headaches. And I'm like, oh, that's so frustrating. So, what are the worst types of EMFs at home, at work, at school?
It's really those exposures very close to the body that are the most concerning, especially because the link between cell phone radiation and your risks of increasing or increasing risk of brain tumor is pretty well established at this point. Of course, they're in heavy users, and we could argue, is it in some studies it's 30 minutes per day. So I don't think that's a heavy user. To me, a heavy user in my mind would be 4 or 5 hours per day. A realtor or business people always on their phone next to the head, but they see a risk of ipsilateral brain tumor. So it means you talk on the right side, you get a right brain tumor, and it can be, glioblastoma to parotid gland to thyroid to acoustic neuroma, and all of these are increasing in the population to some degree. So that's a concern. But on top of
And
that,
sorry to interrupt you, but
no, no
like
problem.
this is not propaganda. There are studies that show this. And I think
For
that
sure.
that is like, I like how, you say the non-tinfoil hat guy, right?
Yeah.
Because people say that and they're like, oh my goodness, you're just like, where's your tin hat? But we're talking about when you hold your phone up to your ear or like have it like that. So
Uh-huh.
so what can people do that's on their phone? They can put it on speakerphone.
Yes.
Um, and what do you think about Bluetooth for someone like you said, a realtor that is on their phone all the time?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the problem. In 2018, looking at the science that we had at the time, many scientists, among them top epidemiologists, said this agent called radio frequency radiation, this is what's emitted by your phone, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. It should be reclassified at the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is a branch of the WHO, World Health Organization, should be reclassified as a class 1 carcinogen. A class 1 carcinogen is a definite carcinogen. It means that the data is so clear that we know it's a carcinogen and we have to urgently tell the population. That was in 2018. And since then, there's been, almost a deafening silence on the matter by WHO, by IARC. And even though radiofrequency radiation has been identified as an agent that, yes, we need to look at later, they were supposed to do the review years ago and they postponed it again by 4 or maybe it was 8 years. So the science is not progressing. And that's concerning because now we have radiofrequency radiation. That's a carcinogen. And who knows if it's a carcinogen? Some scientists say yes, some scientists say no. But the more data that comes out, the more we think that it's a carcinogen because there's many points of data that point in that direction. So if it's, literally as bad as smoking to some degree, maybe we should tell the population. And it also means this: anything emitting radiofrequency radiation is equally a carcinogen, right? And the dose makes the poison. If you're exposed to Bluetooth for 5 minutes, I won't really have any concerns for your health. But if it's 12 hours per day in the form of AirPods, right? Times a lifetime. Now we're talking about maybe a carcinogenic dose where, what it emits towards your brain is preventing your brain from clearing up those cells that are supposed to do apoptosis, that are supposed to be cleaned out by your immune system. And now all of a sudden there's disruption and they are not eliminated. And over time, maybe you develop a tumor. And that's really the big concern is the long-term health impacts. For some people, they might have more immediate effects where even, the doctors I interviewed in the 2025 EMF Hazard Summit, one of them is Dr. Stephanie McCarter. She's an expert in environmental medicine. So they really look at the environment of the patient first, very close, a branch very close to functional medicine, obviously. And what she told me is that young patients come into the clinic, they have tinnitus or they have migraines, and they're going to look at the patient. Okay, what are you wearing? Well, I have these on, all day, every day. They remove the AirPods, and for some of them, not all, but some of them, it's like, wait a minute, my problem is fixed. So they grow almost, a sort of allergy to this signal. It's too much for the brain and it causes a problem in the inner ear or it causes problem in some processing of your brain, and now you get brain inflammation, a headache, and so sometimes it's crystal clear like that. So these are concerns in the short run and also long term when it comes to brain development in younger children or teenagers, nervous system maturation. And there are more and more studies that I've learned about just recording the summit a few months ago that really show that teenagers have attention problems when they are exposed to more of this agent called radio frequency radiation. So, of course, many teenagers will never put a phone to their ear because it's not cool, right? You never call someone, you text. But instead, now they're going to use AirPods. So it's replacing, a pack of cigarettes with light cigarettes. It makes no difference. So the conversation, unfortunately, again, like I said, we're doing the wrong thing by starting to use more and more of these EMF emitting products. And in the end, the precautionary principle, which should have been followed geez, decades ago at this point, is not being followed. To the contrary, while we know that most people, even lay people who are not that interested in health, would say, well, I think removing pesticides is probably good because these things aren't good for us. Like they have one purpose is to kill pests, and herbicides is to kill the weeds, and we shouldn't have that in our body. Most people, I think this way, even those that are not very well versed into the science. And yet with the EMFs, the more dangers that are identified, it's almost like most people are either not listening to it, or they're not being told by their government that these concerns are valid and serious, and that there are ways that you can start reducing exposure. And you talked about one of them is speakerphone, or using wired earbuds. And it's difficult to drop the AirPods. I'll give you that, because for a lot of people it's just a habit they develop. But something right away that could be done, right? Because let's not fall into just bad news. You could use the wired solutions when you're at the computer and you do an interview, or you work, or you study, or you're stationary. So let's not use something that is wireless if you don't even move around, right? If you do a workout and you sprint and you run and you move around, you do power yoga, maybe use them, right? But right there, you could cut out your exposure by all these hours you're spending in front of your computer. So, the cumulative dose is really what matters here. And I see what is ironic is that at this point, I would say most health influencers have AirPods in when they do interviews.
Oh my gosh.
And I
Yes.
just,
It's a pet peeve. It's a pet peeve.
it
Were you
is
gonna like cancel the interview if I like came in with like double AirPods? No, I'm just
No, I
kidding.
wouldn't. But no, you're telling me that as a joke, but I heard colleagues of mine that are activists that said, "You know what? You're doing this call on Wi-Fi. I'm not talking to you." I think that's a wrong approach. I'm not that extreme, and
Right.
why is
Yeah.
that the wrong approach? I think that when people know better and they take these risks more seriously, they're gonna mostly use Ethernet cables to connect. But there are situations where I have to do the interview. I'm on Wi-Fi. I will not blame you for it. I will just advise you on what to do, and then you decide what to do with your life. It's the same approach I have to take even with my wife, with my kid, because being controlling over that can become a big problem with relationships. And the same could be said with like foods.
Yes.
If you
I
go
was
to your
gonna say
husband
that.
or
Yeah.
wife and you look at their plate and you say you're going to eat that, like it doesn't work, right? You're going to destroy your relationship with this kind of behavior. It can be toxic to try to control people. Of course, if your kids are younger, maybe you can tell them, no, don't eat the candy. And I do that with my 6 year old, of course. And also, we teach them how to use these things more safely. So, Elliot at 6 year old already knows that I don't want him to hold the phone. We're listening to something. We're going to set the phone somewhere if it's connected via, the cellular network, which happens sometimes. And if he has a tablet, normally I try to pre download TV shows or movies. For example, if we're doing, a long car ride, it's going to be all pre downloaded. So he knows these things now. And he knows already that it's part of life and that we try to minimize the amount of radiation. But I find that if you're becoming neurotic over it and you say, "Oh no, you can't have that," you're gonna. I mean, by the end of the car ride, if you're on Wi-Fi, you're gonna be dead. No, of course you won't. It's not that. It's not the effect of one car ride. It's the effect of your cumulative dose of EMFs over a lifetime. And right now, for most people, the cumulative dose is tremendously high because they are purchasing the wrong products. They are using the wrong products. They have a phone in their pocket. And when they come home, they don't have a relief either because they set this phone right next to their pillow and it's still open and still emitting Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and a cellular network. So when you change all these behaviors, the reality is that you can cut out your daily exposure by 80, 90, 95%. And I don't think it makes you completely in the clear in the sense, that you will still be impacted by EMFs. And it could be from, cell towers. If it's not from cell towers, it's going to be from Starlink, right? To some extent. Now it's these exposures are everywhere, yes,
Oh, yeah.
but if you change your habits, you can control these things and minimize your exposure. Just like you cannot control completely how many pesticides you're exposed to when you eat food. In a lifetime, you will be exposed to something unless you decide to live off the grid and only eat what you grow. And even then, there's going to be some in the rainwater. So good luck.
Right.
But all that to
Yeah.
say that, it's really minimizing the dose of EMF that matters, not becoming crazy over it.
I agree with that. And when we lived in the Midwest in Ohio, it rained glyphosate. So I did a
There you go.
urine, yeah, I did a urine glyphosate test on my son, and we were eating all organic, and it was still high. And that's
Yep.
normal. That's what they say. No one has a zero toxic burden. So
Yep.
think about that with EMF. So I was talking about this just yesterday to someone. I was like, oh, if I like could build my house myself, I would make it like low EMF. I would have a router,
Mm-hmm.
I would be plugging in like, like we used to when I grew up. I was born in the 80s, and we had that dial where you dial in and you have to
Yeah.
connect. And
Me too. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just not realistic. So I have 4 kids, and they're for age 16 to 5. So I it's so hard. Like you see these kids with like AirPods in like 24/7. I see adults at the gym with the beats on, so
For sure.
we've come up with a compromise that we just do one at a time. So I don't know if that works at all, and when I'm at the gym, this is one thing I changed. So my husband's like, here's some AirPods for you. So what I was doing at the gym is I had an air tube, and I would wear the air tube, but when I was going to squat, I would put my phone in my waistband. And I'm like, well, that's worse because the phone
Yeah.
is on my body. So
Yep.
that's where when I lift, I will wear a single AirPod like in. So I don't know. And yeah, the speakerphone I think is important to do, but I think if you're listening out there, if you have a teenager, like you know that they're going to have some AirPods, and unless they're not exposed to other kids, it's going to be really hard. But you have to have that discussion with them that you shouldn't have it on 24/7, because that's what I
Yeah.
see when I look around the world. Or like you were saying, if you're stationary, plug it in. But okay, tell me about if I'm correct at all with just less exposure with one in, and then it's not bouncing back and forth. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. You're probably cutting your exposure in half, to be honest. So that's an intelligent thing to do. I would say the only product I've found so far that can mitigate AirPod radiation in particular is something called WaveBlock. WaveBlock is a company that does a little tiny sticker that has special material that repels EMFs, and you're gonna wrap it around the base where the antenna is. So it's not a perfect solution. It doesn't make the AirPod completely safe. But if I had a kid and said, okay, well, he's not going to listen anyway, I would probably tell them, look, I'm going to install something on your AirPods. It doesn't change the sound, it doesn't change the function, but it's going to help, reduce exposure. Can you please do that for me? Uh, and I would do that, wave block. So that's,
So
something I share in a video series with the
yeah.
summit. But, uh,
So that one
yeah,
specifically, that brand is vested, right? Because I've had people ask
yeah.
me, are the stickers like we know silver, and maybe we'll get into that, silver blocking blankets and stuff.
Hmm.
But so you're saying the sticker really can you explain scientifically how that works? And I like that you have a brand that you actually like like?
Yeah.
Because I think that can be hard because there's so much out there, just like supplements. That's what I deal like with. I'm like, no,
Yeah,
you're
I
getting
agree.
crappy
And
supplements.
wave block, I don't know the technology by heart, but it's been recommended to me by a few colleagues. I think that the work has been done, and the way the stickers function is probably just that they have different materials on there that are layered, and that basically are very thin and can wrap around, and it installs almost like a sticker. It's not one of these stickers that you stick on your phone that claims to now make your phone harmonize. That's a completely different type of product. These products that claim to harmonize signals, these claims are really extraordinary because I haven't found them to be, rooted in science at all. Some users feel better using them. I don't know if it's the placebo effect, and it's very hard to navigate. But basically, what they're finding is that in with these stickers, they claim an 87% reduction of the power measured. Some of them, I think the stickers are black, so they do look like something, but they look aesthetic. Oh, you can have white, you can have black. So, it is physically blocking, and that's the difference between certain technologies. Technologies that claim to physically block or something where you have materials that are known to shield against the radiation. An example is Shield Your Body is another very good brand that I recommend. They have many types of products depending on how you carry your phone. One of them could be an EMF blocking case. The case is made from materials that are known to block EMFs in that frequency range. So I do trust that these things help. They're not really a replacement for, airplane mode or never carrying your phone, but they are better than nothing, especially for people that won't listen to you. So I'd say, these solutions, most of the time, I tell about these solutions for people listening that feel powerless, that all their freaking family members will not listen to them. So they ask me, Nick, what can I like? I understand these things for myself and I'm going to do these things. But what about my husband? What about my wife? What about my kids? I love them. I don't want them to be harmed. So okay. Well, in that case, there are some products that maybe can be incorporated in their habits and it will not really change their life too much. It will be a comfortable change for them. So it's part of it. The stickers that you put on your phone that claim, well, now your phone is safe, I don't agree with that. It's not changing the signal that you could measure using a professional equipment like an EMF detector. So I don't trust these solutions much, and I wouldn't rely on them because what we know works is that when we minimize the signal strength, we think that the damage is lessened. It's not zero, but it's less. Just like when a good example could be a water filter. It filters most things. Maybe there will be some chemicals remaining, but if you get the bulk of the exposure, you're doing something great for your health. You're minimizing your dose of chemicals every time you have a glass of water, which could be a lot of times in a year. It could be over 1,000 glasses of water per day and probably way more than that, hopefully. So there you go. This is really these strategies. Like, first you should try to change your habits, but these products can help you minimize your overall dose.
Right. Well, like the EMF blankets. So I take them when I travel on the airport and I just lay it over, like when I'm on my flight, I just cuddle up with it and then I'll just put it on my bed when I'm traveling because whenever I travel, right? And Las Vegas is the worst. I just
It
feel like
is.
there's so many EMFs. Like I'm wearing like my light therapy bracelet. I'm wearing like all the things. So oh, I know what I wanted to ask you about. What do you think of those necklaces with the beads in them that are pretty trendy? Do you have one? You're not wearing one, so I don't.
No, I have different things I'm testing. I'm not talking, publicly about everything I'm testing,
Right.
but a lot of subtle energy devices claim some of them you can keep in your pocket and it's like a card or something that use, geometrical shapes or pyramids or
Right.
crystal or tourmaline or shungite or orgonite. I mean, the terms, I've heard it all. I have way over 100 companies that contacted me in the last 8 years. And it's next to impossible to do this, to be able to vet all these solutions and know how they work and what scientific studies have been done, and why should we trust that these make the cell phone signal or any type of radiation any safer. What I think they do is that they might reinforce something in the body. I think some of them will strengthen the human biofield, which is again difficult to define, but it is measurable. And I did have exchanges with very credible scientists. Some of them have tested these devices, or some of them. And I don't think I'll mention brands necessarily, but I'll say that some products do work. And how they work is that we don't know if they completely nullify the impact of EMFs, but what we do know is this: people who previously talked on the phone without the gizmo on or the pendant felt a certain way, and over time they saw their energy drop. Sometimes they measure the energy in different ways. It could be, heart rate variability, but it also could be subtle energy testing, such as a GDV camera, gas discharge visualization, that looks at the amount of light that your cells are emitting, and it can give you, a correlation with your health. So there are many other modalities. It's not the only thing that's been tested. And what they found is that with these devices on, users seems to keep their energy or conserve their energy. Or let's say another way to put it is that they were not as drained physically and mentally after the cell phone exposure when they had a pendant or they had these devices that they add to the phone. So to me it says, okay, well, there's something there. Should we use these solutions? um well, we probably should. However, it's difficult to recommend one over another. And then the last thing I want to do is make it appear that these things are a panacea or a magic bullet. And a lot of people who purchase those, something I've realized on Instagram, looking at, hashtags, I was finding, EMF information and trying to post my own stuff. And I realized that EMF protection is the number one keyword in that space now. And what is under EMF protection? If you search for it, it's mostly pyramids and crystals and bracelets and pendants. So people are not talking about EMF protection in the sense that, well, if I have my phone, I don't keep it in my pocket. I turn it off at night. I turn off the Wi-Fi. So these habits that are not very sexy to talk about and they require effort and conscious effort, they're not talked about. Instead, what is cool is, look, I have this beautiful bracelet. Now I'm protected. I have this pendant, makes me invincible. I have installed these things on my phone, and I think now my phone is safe. So I think it's kind of the wrong approach. I think that first, you
Yes.
try to minimize EMFs from all your sources. And then second, if you find something that works for you, it's a pendant, and you say, my God, I feel way better. Dependent might do other things besides, strengthening your defenses against EMFs. It might be something that just helps your energy because there are some other mechanism. And I don't know all of them and cannot comment on individual products necessarily, but I did see that some things are supportive. So I cannot, completely reject that product category. However, we have to be careful in how we talk about those. They're not magic, and they're not a replacement for proper EMF hygiene.
Yes, it's such great insight because I see this a lot in the supplement or peptide world. And it's
Yeah,
like, you can't just like throw peptides on top of a terrible lifestyle or supplements and you're not
exactly.
sleeping
Yeah.
and it's going to fix everything. And like you said, it's like a sexy topic, right? And that gets the clicks and everything, but we got to go to the basics. And that's how you really help. So like you were saying, like putting your phone on speakerphone or setting your phone away from you, not putting it in your pocket, turning it in airplane mode at night. And I tell people, if like my patients, if you can't, like if you need a phone call or like you're worried someone, a parent's sick or something, then leave your phone on ring, but set it away, the
No
furthest away
way.
you
Yeah.
can. And I always like the trick of, we put our Wi-Fi on a Christmas tree timer. It's $4 to get. So it's off at night. Except like, I remember when I first started doing this, like 10 years ago, my husband and I were watching TV and we got sucked into a series, and then the internet went off and he was like, Jenny. And I'm like, sorry, like,
Oops. Well, it
oops,
looks
it's
like, yeah, it's also keeping you honest about your bedtime.
right,
I mean,
right.
yeah,
Yeah,
I've
two
heard parents
birds.
that tell me it helps me, you know, make sure that my kids are not on Wi-Fi at 11 p.m. when I told them to go to bed at 9, yeah,
Oh,
right?
that's
So it kind
hilarious.
of, oh, well, the
True.
Wi-Fi is gone now, and they're like, ah, geez.
Yep.
Yep,
Time for
there you
bed.
go.
They're gonna find me out if I'm still on it. So
Yeah.
what are your top ways for reducing your EMF exposure? I know I got off track with all the shiny objects, but I always have people ask me on
Yeah.
Instagram about them. So I just wanted to address it for them.
Yeah, I think it's
By
brilliant, and you mentioned a lot of them. I think that around sleep is really the critical time to lower EMFs as low as you can possibly achieve it. So a lot of people are really focused on what their neighbor is emitting and say, "Oh, those are neighbors. They have a Wi-Fi router." And what about my neighbors? What about no? What about your stuff first? So a lot of people don't realize they can turn off Wi-Fi, and they should. They can automate the process, like you said, with an outlet timer or the kind of things you use for Christmas lights. You can turn off your phone or set it in the next room, or keep it on airplane mode, while also turning off the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. You can make sure that there's no other EMF emitting gizmo in your bedroom. And my bedroom is clean, I can tell you that, because obviously I've been working on it. But if I go to a hotel room, I'll find multiple sources of EMFs uh, that are completely useless in many situations. For example, I'm someone who, when I go to a business trip, I'll still use my phone as my alarm clock. My phone is on airplane mode, so it's not emitting any wireless, and yet it can keep track of time and wake me up in the morning. So it does the trick. But oftentimes they will have an alarm clock right there next to my pillow, and I look at the alarm clock and say, okay, what is this thing? A Bluetooth icon on it. So the EMF guy is like, uh-oh, we've got a bit of an issue here. And of course, I always measure. So I have an EMF detector, which makes you able to hear sounds if there's, wireless radiation. And it's screeching every couple seconds. And it turns out that the Bluetooth is emitted every couple seconds for life. That's how the machine behaves. So it's always looking for a phone. Instead, how it should be designed is that you have to click a button on the machine to then sync it to a phone, which would be, it would save energy in the first place, would save cost. And we're trying, I thought we were supposed to be green, guys. No, electronics are the opposite of green on so many levels, but the way they
Dirty.
are designed when it comes to wireless radiation, always, always, always on. Well, that Bluetooth chip needs to be powered. So it's costing you a bit of money from your entire yearly bill if you have this alarm clock and don't even use it, right? It's powering the alarm clock itself, and then it's powering the little chip that says, I'm looking for a phone for its entire existence. So what you do with this machine is you unplug it from the wall. So these are the type of sources that you need to go about your home and just find these sources. If you have something that you barely use, let's say you have speakers and they're Bluetooth, don't keep them on. Just have them off, and when you need them, you say, oh, I'm going to listen to music. Okay, now put them on. So a lot of people wouldn't really think about technology this way because, everything is plugged in. I don't have to think about it. But if you become more conscious of what emits wireless radiation, you're going to find a lot of different sources, and these are great ways to minimize exposure.
That's a great point. And I think everyone listening out there, start in your bedroom, because that is where you're spending the most time. And that's
Yes.
also where your brain is going through the lymphatics. So the lymphatic system of your brain to wash out the bad and cleanse it. So I guess don't freak out right now, just like go to your bedroom. And I think that's a great tip. Like I didn't know. So I usually unplug and I feel bad. I try to remember to plug it back in because one summer I did housekeeping for a hotel, and that would be super annoying if people kept
Yeah.
unplugging the,
Yeah.
the alarm clock, and I had to reset it every time. So I try to remember to plug it back in. But I will unplug it because of the light pollution. So I
Yep.
didn't even think about looking at it, that it's Bluetooth and it's emitting signals, because a lot of the times those clocks are what you plug your phone into. So even if your phone's in airplane mode and you're just using it for a charger, you should plug it directly into the wall, because otherwise you're going to get these surges, you said, and it's right by your head.
Yep.
So yeah, like what's hard, I think, about all of this is the Bluetooth, like you said, having it just not on pairing mode, but continuously seeking.
Hmm.
It's just convenience, and it's like fast food, right? We're trading health for convenience, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, well, imagine not all the people are aware of this, but there are ways to design technologies that are so much safer. It wouldn't make, these changes. Let's say if we changed all Wi-Fi routers to make them act a different way. So, for example, instead of emitting the amount of radiation that they emit all the time, 24/7, which is the case for most routers, they're not intelligent in their design and they don't modulate their exposure. So, in other words, you could be in the middle of nowhere, or let's say you're in a city, everyone is sleeping, and there's a Wi Fi hotspot from the city. It's emitting the maximum power. And it's not like its power is dependent on how many users is connected to it. What should happen is that all these machines need to be essentially turned off, or just have a very low level beacon signal, that's called, that is just the minimal amount possible. So when you have a user connect to it, now the machine wakes up and it can be used, right? It should be like that. It is like that to some extent with cell phone towers, because they're trying to save energy costs and the power will increase if there are more users on it. But these are changes that could be done by the companies to minimize EMF radiation in all scenarios. This is how things should be designed. And unfortunately, at the moment, they're not. So it leaves, you and I talking on a podcast, talking on a Zoom discussion here, to make sure that people pay attention. And that's a shame, because it shouldn't be up to us to protect ourselves. Like engineering solutions that have been proposed by scientists before is, let's use the proximity sensor on your iPhone to make it, and it has a proximity sensor, and you can probably tell nowadays, because if you look at it, it opens, or if you have your hand be close to it, it opens. In fact, it uses an invisible light, and in the infrared spectrum, which is always beeping, and it detects whatever is close and how close it is. So the technology is there. It should detect that. Let's say I put it in my shirt pocket, the phone should say, "Uh-oh, well, it's close to an object, and now it's turned off." Right? So right there, you could have these engineering changes. I think that some of them would cost next to nothing to these companies to make, but of course, it would make it less convenient for users, because you would say, "Oh, I was expecting a call and I left my phone in my shirt pocket right next to my heart, and I wanted to, blast my heart as much as possible with EMFs. And I
Yes.
don't care about these things. I don't care about EMFs. I just wanted the call." Well, now you're unable, because Apple needs to protect the population. So now we've made that mandatory on all technologies, and it has to come from government or from user demand. It has to be
Yes.
people that ask, "Look, Apple, if you don't put this feature on, I'm going to switch to a safer phone." And that's kind of what is happening, but I see that happening. It's going to take, I'd say 1 or 2 decades. I've already seen changes with some companies that are appearing on the market that want to compete over health and have safer devices. But right now, I a lot of people ask me, is it, the iPhones that are more dangerous, or the Android? They're all equally bad, because none of them compete over health. They compete over features, and the retina screen, and you know it's really the most, for most devices, it's the opposite of health that they're offering. It's more
Yeah.
addiction, and cool
Yeah, I
features,
agree.
but Yeah.
I like didn't want to update because of that like weird feature. Yeah, you pick it up and it stays on, and I'm like, oh, but then the camera's better, so I can do more content that is
Yeah.
helping people. So it's such a balance. But oh my goodness, do you know, like, have you ever watched like teenage girls? They all keep their phone right tucked in over their ovary, like in their
Yeah.
waistband on their ovary, like all the time. And I caught my daughter doing it a few times, and I just discussed with her. I'm like, your eggs that like you don't make new eggs, your eggs are in there. Like you're frying your eggs, like you're
Yeah.
frying your eggs. And then my son, who's 12, going on 16, is like getting in that teen space, but he'll tease me about it. He'll be like, Mom, my phone's in my pocket next to my balls. Like, and I'm like, stop, like stop. But for men it's a
Yeah.
little different, like because your sperm are going to be regenerating, but still we don't want to blast all your cells there and mess with the feedback loop. But it's I think that education with kids, because mine tease me about it, right? But they know better, right? So they're going to be thinking about that,
Yeah.
and they're going to make different choices as opposed to just out there. But oh my goodness, what maybe we could start like an Instagram reel trend, like don't wear your phone in your breast. That's the other thing. I remember when I worked at an inner city emergency room for a decade, I would always talk to the nurses about it. And this is like 20 years ago. And we're like, oh my gosh, like, why did they come in? They like with their cell phones in their bra.
Yeah.
Like, that is the worst place you can put your phone. Like, uh, so anyway, I just have flashbacks to that because I would talk to them and be like, don't put your phone there. Like, that's terrible. But I love that idea of really consumer driven conviction to these cell phone companies for safer, warnings against, EMFs and radiation. So that's
For
great.
sure. At the moment, the industry is fighting all they can to avoid even having basic precautionary measures explained in the phone insert or anything like that. They're fighting because they say, "Oh no, you're going to spook users." And it's all based on the myth or really the lie that everything is safe. It's not. And the reality is that, we have to change how we use them because and it's not going to be the industry that's gonna admit, oh yeah, guys, all the devices that we sold you, they were unsafe, and for some people, they got brain tumors. Like it would be a huge thing to admit, and it would really, really hurt the reputation of these companies because in the end, it would say users would blame them, even if they didn't know, right? They're gonna blame Apple. They're gonna find someone to blame, and the companies are gonna be hit with massive lawsuits also. So I know that's coming down the road, but for the average person, you just need to protect yourself best as you can, and just be mindful about these exposures. If I can achieve one goal today, it would be just to have someone listen to the information and then at least do one thing differently. That's sufficient to move the needle.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my goodness. I feel like we could talk all day. We'll have to do a part two, but there's another chance to listen to a lot more information on EMFs. And why don't you tell everyone about the summit that's coming up?
100%. April 10 to 15 is the 2025 EMF Hazard Summit. And we talked a lot about exposure to teens and to children, and the fact that, the impacts are even more important to their developing brain. That's a theme this year. So, of course, people who want to protect themselves are invited. And we're going to share a ton of science around, with the latest or the top EMF scientists and EMF aware doctors. But on top of that, we talk specifically to young parents or parents of teenagers or grandparents who want to educate and protect the next generation against this technology. So, it's all based on education. It's down to earth. It is solution focused. And my goal is to really help you tackle this problem in your life and be empowered to start developing healthier habits around technology. So you have 18 different presentations from April 10 to 15.
Well, I'm going to be watching because I can always learn more on this topic and I want to protect my family. It's important. So, and how can everyone find you? We're going to link a link to the summit and everything. And you're the EMF guy on all things. Is that where
The
we're
EMF
finding?
guy, my Instagram is at Nick Pineault. It's gonna be tough to find because Pineault is not intuitive. But if you type EMF guy, I'm fairly sure you're gonna find it. But also my main website, you can find all my handles there and my education at theemfguy.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nick. We really appreciate your time and your education in this very important subject.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.